What if you could dissociate your vet work from your income? What if the number of hours you worked were mainly determined by how much you had to give and not by how much you needed to get? How many of the problems associated with the vet profession that we talk about endlessly would just evaporate? In this episode, Dr. Mike Bugg gives us some ideas around how you could make that happen. Yes, this is to some extent an episode about money, but it's also about getting very clear with yourself on how you want to spend your hours. And if it sounds like magic, well, it kind of is. The magic of having the right mindset. Mike shares with us how to develop that mindset, how to strategize, as well as some practical advice on how to turn those goals into reality. So who is Mike? Dr. Michael Bugg, according to his official bio, is a real estate investor, veterinarian, and entrepreneur. Dr. Mike's veterinary journey wasn't always smooth sailing, though. So much so that he'd earned himself the nickname Miserable Mike during his final years in practice, reflecting the weight of the challenges that he was feeling in the profession. But he took those struggles as an opportunity for growth, diving into personal development and taking what he was learning to help build a supportive community for veterinarians that eventually culminated in the creation of the Veterinary Project, which is a platform for veterinarians to share their stories and support each other. Mike is also a fellow podcaster and the co-host of the Veterinary Project podcast, and recently an author with his book, You're Going to Get Peed On: How Veterinarians Can Keep Their Dream Job from Becoming a Nightmare while working less and earning more. And then, as the bio in the beginning of this intro suggests, he is an experienced and successful real estate investor. So expect a bit of investment chat on this episode. Above all, Dr. Mike is passionate about lifestyle design and challenging the limits of what's possible in life, which, as you know, is right up my alley. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. But before we jump in, a few things coming up for us. I've told you about New Zealand and the Snow Conference from 13 to 18 August this year, where I'll be doing some live podcasting with world-class speakers on palliative care, oncology, and much, much more. And also lots and lots of snowboarding. There are still a few tickets available. Come and join us. Link in the show description. And then something new and exciting. I'm coming to America, baby. First trip to the US ever for IVEX, the International Conference for Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care, from 7 to 11 September in Denver, Colorado. We'll have our own stall, we'll have a couch, and we'll have microphones. I've been busy lining up my guests that we will interview about their topic right there on the trade floor, and I would love your help in asking questions so we can create some amazing clinical and non-clinical content. Please come and see us, sit on the couch with us, tell us your story, ask me your questions on or off air. It is going to be epic. That is 7 to 11 September 2023. Link in the show description. Okay, let's get back to Dr. Michael Bugg. Welcome to the VetVelt podcast.
It's fantastic to be here. I'm very excited.
We were just saying beforehand that I really loved preparing for this interview because often when you interview vets, they're not always that much out there in the public sphere. So when I try and research topics and dig a little bit deeper into their backgrounds and basically do a bit of Google stalking, right? They just don't really exist on the internet. So often I go kind of blind into these interviews. But with you provided me with a lot of good content, man. We could talk for hours and hours.
I'm excited to see where we all take it. And I'm excited to explore some of the topics we maybe don't always get to talk about. So take it wherever you want.
Nice. Well, we'll jump in and remind me to talk about your book because I'm very curious as to the why. But I'm going to start with, in my researching of you, I came across this line in one of your blogs. This is a lot of work, and it always will be. So what does that mean to you, and what is the significance of that?
Yeah. So for your listeners that probably don't know me, I'm up in Canada. I grew up on a mixed farm, so that means beef cattle and grain. And in its most simplest form, as a grain farmer, you can store your grain in either a flat bottom bin, which is exactly as it sounds. It's flat with big cylinder, or a hopper bin, which is basically a giant funnel. And I remember when I was in my teens, helping my dad build these bins on our farm. And we were building one of these flat bottom bins. And so summer in Saskatoon, where I live, is about 30 degrees Celsius. when you're building these bins, they're giant aluminum, right? Stainless steel. So the sun's beating down, it's reflecting on you. It's excruciatingly hot, dirty, hard work. And I'm sitting there working on the floor of this bin, and my dad comes by. And I'm saying this more in an offhand, complaining, bratty teenage way. And I say, this is a lot of work, and it always will be. And what I'm referring to is once this bin is built, for us to actually use it, we have to climb inside every time in the hot heat and shovel the grain out like that last little bit. So I was like, this makes no sense to me, right? Like, we're going to work really hard to create a system that we have to work really hard every time we want to use it, right?
Yeah.
And so the significance is that has really affected how I look at how I earn money and how I invest, because I'm always looking for opportunities where can I work really hard and create a system that's excellent, but once I've created the system, it kind of operates on itself like those hopper bins would.
That's gold, because we get stuck in the same old rut. We do things the way we do it because that's the way we do it. And it often takes something, or for most of us, it takes something big to make us go, well, this is why we're going to change. And it's often some sort of an outside influence. But actually stopping and going, could I do this in a better way? And this applies to clinical practice and to life, to anything really. Do you have any standout examples in your life, whether it's vet or non-vet related or personal life or anything, where you've applied this principle, where you've gone, okay, well, I used to do things this way, but it's really stupid. There's a better way of doing things. And that's paid really good dividends for you. And I don't mean just financial dividends.
Yeah. I mean, so the shift that has occurred in my life, I've gone very much from I can do it and I will do it myself type mentality. And we can apply that almost to everything. And now I'm looking at my life much more of, where do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to devote my energy? And so for me, like, decision-making and outsourcing has totally changed. So these are super minor examples, but when you start to master all of these little minor things, it's amazing how they can save time and energy for the big thing. So, sometimes I'm even embarrassed to say it, but like, I don't cut my own grass. I don't shovel the snow on the driveway up here in Canada, right? These are very, very simple things. But I truly believe, every professional, every veterinarian, we don't cook our own meals anymore, right? We have all of this stuff fully outsourced so that me and my wife can focus on, what is our highest value tasks, which are raising our family, and then where we want to spend our, professional time. And I think veterinarians are often really guilty of, we are good at a lot of stuff. But sometimes just because we can do it doesn't mean we should.
Yeah. Man, that's a lesson I've been trying to learn, specifically in the last 3 to 5 years, is that outsourcing thing. And I still get stuck on it because, again, we talked about it before the podcast. I do a lot of the, let's say, the grunt work, the day-to-day stuff, the editing and all that sort of stuff. And my stumbling block, my personal one, and I think it'll be the same for a lot of people when it comes to the mowing of the lawns and the outsourcing and the everyday task, is money, right? I go, well, if I pay somebody $100 to edit a podcast, or I can do it myself, and a part of me goes, well, I should just do it myself because I'm going to save that money. Or the same thing, and you should come and visit me because I have a very vast lawn that needs mowing. I have a tractor that we mowed with. And I keep saying to my wife, we should probably just pay somebody to do this. But we don't, because we go, well, it's money that I'm going to have to spend, that I'm going to have to earn back in another way. And I can't do it. So how do I combat that? How do I get over that? And for the listeners as well, how do you value your time enough to go, well, I could pay somebody else to do this stuff for me?
Yeah. And it's a tricky one. And I'm not going to, try come off like I have it all figured out, because I do believe there's phases to life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a saying that I really like, which is, what got you here won't get you there. So if I'm a veterinary student, I probably should be cutting my own lawn and shoveling my own driveway.
Yes. You should probably do somebody else's so they could pay you for it.
Yeah. And everyone around the block has a side hustle, because it is like just sort of the value of that money it's a different equation, and as you get older, things will start to change. So your earning potential now as a clinical veterinarian, like it's more complicated because it's not just a spreadsheet, but we can all agree that an hour spent doing surgery or whatever your preferred form of clinical practice is a higher value task than mowing the lawn. Right? Like when you lay that out, it's very obvious. Like I can go earn X hundreds of dollars in 1 hour doing whatever, and I can spend $45 for someone to come along. And then I go even further. You have to add in the intangibles, right? I don't have to think about, do I have a lawnmower? Is it full of gas? Do I have to go get gas? All of that stuff is taking bandwidth in the background of your day, right? And have you talked to a single veterinarian recently that is like, I have all the time in the world, right? It's like, no, we're all just jammed, packed, and we're looking at our calendars. They're packed full, our energy, our emotional bandwidth. And it's like, we have to start clawing that back wherever we can. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, which is very sensible. I think people listening to this, potentially in Australia, and I don't know what it's like in the US and in Canada money-wise, but the counter-argument will be, well, it's not necessarily dollar for dollar because of, and again, we won't go down the whole wages, the vet wages discussion, because we can talk about that for ages. But lots of people will go, no, I earn about the same as I would pay somebody to mow my lawn. And that's about where Australia is at with vet wages, or let's say that's the cost of outsourcing labor, other work. So a lot of people will go that, no, it's not the same. So I could choose whether I do vet work to pay the lawnmower person, or I could not do vet work and do the lawn mowing myself. And we keep going about lawn mowing, but the same goes for lots of things. So like childcare and all sorts of other things. So it's kind of, but I like what you say about the intangibles to go, well, do I like mowing that lawn? Maybe it's my relaxation. Maybe I hate it. Maybe I should rather just be in the clinic doing something that I like.
Well, I think when we open a conversation around money, ultimately what people want money to do for them is to allow them to do more of the things they like and less of the things they don't like. Right? So it's like, take cooking. Some people really love cooking. Awesome. You should do that. If you hate it, you should outsource it and you should earn your money doing something that you love. Right? That would be like in the perfect scenario.
On the topic of personal development, there's a popular saying that I really like. You are the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. With our clinical podcasts, you'll surround yourself with 20 to 30 of some of the smartest, most qualified people in the world of small animal medicine, surgery, and emergency and critical care. They'll hop in the car with you on the way to work, go for a walk with you, or chat to you while you do the dishes, all the while imparting their skills and knowledge to you in a fun and engaging way. And before you know it, you'll be the one that others want to surround themselves with so they can learn from you. Become the smartest kid in the room again by joining our community of VetVault nerds at vvn.supercast.com. Yeah, let's talk about money because it's a big topic and it's almost, I've said it before on the podcast, but in our profession, it's almost a dirty word. Like we're a caring profession. We shouldn't be talking about money. It's a bit rude to talk about money, right? I'm interested. I read on your blog, a couple of blog posts ago, you talked about before having your daughter. Have you got multiple kids now, or is it still just the one?
We do now, yeah. 3.5-year-old Riley and a 5-month-old Ethan.
Ooh, very young, very little. Okay. So before your first one, you wrote that you and your wife sat down and you had a discussion about what do we want our life to look like as a family going ahead. Which, first of all, I really like that. I really like the thoughtfulness around that. Instead of just saying, well, we're going to jump into this river and it's going to take us somewhere. Instead of that, you're going, no, I have a boat and I've got a paddle and we're going to decide a direction where we can steer this boat a little bit and be thoughtful about how you want to live your life. So that's gold, first of all. But I'm curious, in that discussion, was money part of that discussion? Were you talking about, or did you talk about how we want to earn this much and how we're going to use this money? Was that part of that initial discussion?
For me, it is now for sure. And I don't remember when the switch flipped, but I've gotten very comfortable speaking about money. And luckily, Rosalie, my wife, we're on the same page where we have a lot of money conversations. And I'm of the opinion that there are two things in life that are going to have a dramatic effect on you, whether you care about them or not, whether you talk about them or not, or whether you pay any attention to them or not. And that's health and money, right? Like your health, something is going to happen to it, whether you pay attention or not.
Death and taxes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And that's the same as money. You can bury your head in the sand, but in the world we live in, money is still going to affect you. So, you may as well get through that uncomfortableness. And like you said, you can have a sense of direction of where you're going to take it. And in this world, it will require money to do that. So it was a huge part of our conversation.
Okay, so talk me through your story for anybody who doesn't follow you or doesn't know you. At that stage where you're practicing veterinarian or practice owner, give us a quick recap. Mike, the new grad student, to Mike now. How did life go for you?
Yeah, the quick summary. So as I mentioned, I grew up on a farm. That's important because that really dictated what I thought my life would look like, right? So I had the grand vision of I'm going to be sort of a big beef cattle rancher, but I'm also going to be a veterinarian, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to have all these cattle, and I really do love cattle. I'm going to live on a farm. So I go to vet school. I graduate. We fast forward a few years, and all of a sudden, I'm not doing mixed practice anymore. I'm doing small animal. And if we fast forward to now, I'm doing exactly none of what I thought I would be doing. I'm not clinically practicing as a veterinarian. I don't own any cattle, and I live in a city, not in the farm. So it's just, it is funny. And if you would have pulled me back in my first year of veterinary school and said, out of 100, how certain are you that this is what your life will look like? I would have been high 80s, 90s. Like this is exactly where I'm headed, right? And so it's comical now, whatever this is, 15 years later or so, to be like, nope, it's exactly opposite.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there was a few kind of moments in there, and one of them was on the drive to work for my very first day as an official veterinarian, right? So tons of time in the clinic volunteering, been there as a summer student, but it does hit quite a lot different when you're officially the veterinarian that is signing off, on cases. But I remember driving to work and stopping at a red light and just sort of gripping the steering wheel and thinking to myself, wow, like this is it. Like this, I will be making this drive for the next 30 to 40 years, to the vet clinic to work from 8:30 to 5:30 or whatever those hours might look like. And honestly, it felt very trapping to me, right? I wasn't quite prepared for what that meant. And I definitely wanted more freedom and flexibility in my life.
This was day one.
That was day one. I still I vividly remember it because this is, I'm going to throw us off on a little bit of a tangent here, but one of the things that I see a lot of veterinarians do, and that I certainly did, is I was very outcome oriented, right? Like outcome oriented goals. So it's get into vet school. Okay. Get through year 1, year 2, year 3, graduate, internship, residency, if that's your thing. And you reach this final outcome where it's like, okay, you've officially checked off all of those outcome goals that you set. And then you look and you're standing on top of the mountain and you're like, kind of like, well, now what? Like you feel a little bit lost because there's not another immediate outcome goal in front of you. Like the next logical one is retire. That's 30 or 40 years away. Like that's a long time. Like that's a big void to fill if you're waiting for that to make you happy. And I was like, wow, like we've got to evaluate this.
Sorry, I find that hilarious that was actually day one, because I feel like a lot of us get to that point, but for many of us, it takes at least like 5 years or so until you get to that point.
And I will clarify that just meant I felt trapped by the idea of having to go, exchange my time for money on day one. The many years of my career I really enjoyed. When we start talking about maybe burnout or whatever word we want to use there, that's quite a lot later in my career when it felt like, I'm on a hamster wheel. You're working like 40, 50, 60 hours and it just felt like a grind, right?
I get that 100%. personal question though. Did you have any of the same sort of thoughts the day that you got married? Like, is this going to be it for the rest of my life?
Yeah, no, we're good there on that one.
Okay, good. No, I totally get that, Mike. I think I've told the story before on the podcast, and again, mine took a lot longer than that. But I have an old diary. Like, I don't keep an official diary, but I always have a notebook of some sort where I can scribble down thoughts and things that I need to do. It's all basically just my brain on a piece of paper to get it out of my head. And in an old one of those, there's a line underlined that says, "If not this, then what?" And I had to verbally ask myself this question because I got to the same point going, this is the same thing. I'm not growing. I'm just exchanging, as you say, exchanging my time. And especially as I started having kids, and that my time just became so much more valuable where I went, I don't want to do it. And it's not that I don't want to do the work. I just don't want to do it in this manner for the next 30 years until I retire.
Mm-hmm.
So, quick question for you about that, Mike. Those thoughts that you had driving to the clinic, was it really just that? Or were there specific things about the job or the workplace or the work that you were going to do? Or was it just that feeling of, I like the work, but I don't want to do the same thing every day? What led to that thought pattern? Do you know? Do you remember it all?
For me, it's like, and everything I've kind of started scripting my life around, and everyone is optimizing for something, right? Whether we've acknowledged that or not. Like, some people are optimizing to earn as much money as they can. I'm optimizing for freedom. Like, that is my highest value, right? So for me, it was strictly around, I really didn't like having those guardrails on my day where it's like, I will have to be here at 8:30 and I will get to leave at 5:30, and you will carry the call phone on this day and you'll take these weekends. Like, where I worked was excellent. My mentorship was excellent. I have nothing negative that I could possibly say about where I worked, other than it was like, those were the parameters. And for me, I was like, man, that is a tough pill to swallow for my life.
So what did you do about it?
For me, I started kind of implementing a plan where I could phase that down. Like, when we look at my clinical veterinary career, I didn't just go from working to not, right? I kind of laid out like an investment plan where I was like, okay, now work, I don't want to say optional, but I can start reducing it, right? And I actually came traveling to Australia in 2009 or 10, somewhere in there. And that was part of my transition. When I came back into small animal medicine, and I was on more of a floating schedule where I could, ramp up my work if the clinic needed. But when they didn't, I would dial it down. And I was trying to keep my income at the same level while reducing the number of days I would go into the vet clinic, right? So an ideal world for me in there was working, 3 days a week at the vet clinic. I had other investment stuff on the go. And I kept just trying to dial that down to where, you get to the point where you can choose if you go in or not.
So was that locuming or casual work? Like how did you practically increase that? Was it let me work for less for the same amount of money at the end of the month? Was it switching to smallies work that did it for you, or casual work? How did you practically achieve that?
Part of it would have been switching to small, but just building your skill set, right? I had a strong interest in surgery, so I would focus a lot of my CE there and try to bring new skills to the clinic, that weren't there. So now they can start offering different surgeries that they weren't offering before. And when you start to do those things, you're more valuable, right? Like, you're delivering more value, you're helping more patients, the clinic is earning more, you'll get to earn more. And in that in-between time too, I also did locum, right? So I was working at my primary clinic, and then there was another clinic that I would go grab shifts. But the beauty of that is, like, you can choose, right? If I wanted holidays or I was going somewhere, I just didn't have to accept those locum shifts. But if it fit, I would grab extra. And that just sort of helped to speed up that whole investing process.
Yeah, I want to get back to that investing part, because now you're working and you're earning the money. But what often happens is that's where the thought process stops for a lot of people to go, well, I'm working, I'm making more money, so I'm saving more, so I can spend more. I can have better holidays or better stuff. So what were you doing with Like why earn that extra money? What was your thought process about it in the longer term, other than let's get myself more time in the short term? How are you spending that money, or how are you investing it, or what are you doing with it?
Yeah. So for me, it's been real estate investing. Like that has definitely been my primary investment tool. And it comes right back to freedom. Like I knew I could calculate out, if we buy an investment property and I hold it for 10 years, you can look at, okay, the mortgage will pay down and the rent is going to be this much. So there'll be this much cash flow. But it really came down to that freedom, right? It's continually dropping that in and knowing, okay, every time I have this investment amount, that replaces a day of work, and that's how I unofficially tracked it as, what do I earn as a veterinarian for the day? Okay, if I can create an investment that earns that, I just bought myself one day back.
You've got a unique mindset. So even going back to where you talk about increasing your personal value, so basically your per hour value. When I show up at the vet clinic, am I going to get $30 an hour, or is it going to be $80 an hour? And a lot of people in our profession will, over time, actually increase their skill and their value, but they won't go and bargain for it. They'll be there 10 years later for kind of the same salary. And I don't know why. Why? Do you know why? Like, have you come across that money mindset? We talked in the beginning where in the vet profession, it's often sort of frowned upon to talk about money or to sell yourself. And it's that whole caring profession thing. I had a discussion just last week. I was at a conference and I had a discussion with a very, very talented vet who said just outright, I don't care about money. And I was listening going, yeah, now you don't. But in 20 years' time, or even in 10 years' time, when you have responsibilities, or maybe you've got kids or a family, whatever, and suddenly you're going to go, oh, I wish that I cared a little bit more about money when I was in my 20s, that day sitting next to the pool. What have you found personally, Mike, with vets and their mindsets around money?
Oh, this is a good question and a good topic. And so I'm going to dive in, and keeping in mind, this is my opinion. It's not, I haven't ran a global survey and said, this is definitively what all veterinarians think. But these are my observations of a decade of clinical practice and talking to lots of veterinarians. And I refer to it in the book. I talk about kind of the money mindset drain that I see affecting the veterinary industry. And there's kind of three parts to that. And as I dive in, I'll set the table. So I already mentioned the first thing: health and money affect everyone, whether you pay attention to it or not. The next thing, just as we look at this, everyone has a story with money, right? Whether they're acknowledging it or not, they have feelings, they have emotions, they may have past trauma attached to it. So when you're talking with someone about money, you're not just talking to them in that present day, you're talking to them with all the stuff they're bringing to the table, which you know nothing about, right? You have no idea what their past money traumas may be. So when I look globally at the veterinary profession, number one big thing affecting us is we're starting from behind financially, right? So if you look at the cost of education to become a veterinarian, you're looking at 6 to maybe to 10 years. You got tuition, you got living expenses. By the time we graduate, there's various stats depending on the region, but you're probably a couple $100,000 in debt. So we have that just on the spreadsheet as a number, but we also have, what does that do to us emotionally, right? To that veterinary student that's graduating with $250,000 in debt, how does that feel to them? That's starting to affect how they think about money. And then part two of that is the opportunity cost. So we're in school for 10 years. Sure, you earn a little bit, with summer gigs or an internship, but in the grand scheme of things, you don't earn a lot, right? And I'll compare that just for argument's sake. Say you take someone, two people graduate high school together, one person goes just into a trade, 2-year course, they're earning money right away. Veterinarian goes into school, 10 years later, they graduate. If you compare those two people 10 years out, they're going to have very different money stories, because one of them is going to feel like they're drowning in debt. And the other one's going to be, I've been working for 8 years. I have a lot of savings. I'm not saying one is better or worse than the other, right? We're just highlighting that there's a story and there's emotions to the veterinarians, and they are unfortunately starting from behind with the way everything is structured.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, because if you committed the extra 8 years of study or whatever for vet, and you came out with a qualification where you are now suddenly earning 5 times or 10 times more than the trade person, then you can catch up. But it's not the reality. The reality is that you walk out and you're earning the same as that guy who started his career 2 years out of school.
Yeah, unfortunately it is. And it's funny because, or at least this is how I experienced it, is everyone thinks veterinarians are really rich. They're like, oh, you're a veterinarian. Oh, you are really wealthy at it. And you're sitting there being like, yes, I mean, yes, we live in a first world. We're very rich in lots of ways, but we don't earn anywhere near what people think we earn. There's quite a dichotomy there.
Yep. I think none of us have not had that conversation with a client or with a stranger or somebody. So sorry, I interrupted you earlier. So you're saying about the mindset.
So yeah, basically the first part, you're starting from behind. So the second part that comes into this is, you've probably heard the saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that applies in all areas of our life. And that would also apply when we talk about money conversations. Now, the catch is, most people do not talk about money, right? They're not sitting around the dinner table talking about money. When them and their friends go out to have a beer, they're probably not talking a lot about money. So what I found was, the veterinary clinic actually made up the vast majority of the money conversations, because we take a group of veterinarians, we're all starting from behind, we all feel kind of that same pressure. Then we take a client that just had an emergency with their pet that they weren't planning for, right? And they're emotionally distraught, and rightfully so. But we take the 2 parties, we put them in an exam room, and then we throw an estimate right in the middle of them. And we say, okay, we can save your pet for $1,200. So now we've got 2 people here with all their past emotional money stuff, and we take a highly emotional situation and we tell them, talk about money right now. You guys got to sort this out. And it's like, it is just the most hopeless situation ever. Like, who is going to navigate that money conversation? I kind of saw you smirking. Yeah. I wanted to get your take on that.
No, it's so true. It's that story runs deep, even if you're aware of it. And I can talk about it from personal experience, especially around veterinary science. You look back to your parents and how they were with money and your childhood, and it made a deep, deep impact on me, and it made it really hard for me. It makes it really hard for me to talk about money to clients. It's the fact that my dad didn't put a lot of monetary value on our pets. Our pets were well loved and they were well cared for, but when it came to spending actual real money on it, it was just like, well, that's ridiculous. And how does that not affect me? How does that not affect me in the consult room talking to a person about money? I just assume that people don't want to spend money on their pets. I have to think about it. I have to think about it cerebrally every time. And every time I have that conversation, there is that emotional response. And I'm aware of it, but even though I'm aware of it, I still can't shake it. Those stories run so, so deep.
And they do. The money stories that we all have, they're all very valid, but they do run very deep, right? Like, they're ingrained in us. And that's like, if you hadn't told me that, I wouldn't know that. And so if I was your veterinarian and you were in the exam room across the table from me, and I'm getting a lot of resistance on well, why, what's going on here? But it's like, I have no clue about your past money story. That's now come to the forefront and may or may not be dictating your actions.
So what do you do about it? What did you, or what do you personally do about it?
Well, I think, the first part is an awareness, like this conversation that we're having, right? Because when we look at it, the third part of what I kind of called the money mindset drain is your thoughts are going to dictate your feelings and are going to dictate your action. So you were aware of that. So that gives you an opportunity to step in the middle of that, right? And choose a different path or a different course of action. The danger is many people won't even spend the time to be aware of it. So that's all happening unconsciously. They don't know why it's happening, but it is. There's a past money story that dictates how they feel. That's going to dictate their actions. That's going to get them the result, which is more of how they were already feeling. right? So step one would be awareness. I would say the next thing that we have to do, you have to start intentionally putting yourself in positive money conversations, right? Because that's sort of what's going to counterbalance that. Because I look at it, this is again my personal opinion. Money is just simply a tool. Like, it's not inherently good or bad. Like, money in and of itself has never done anything to me. It's people that are controlling the money and what they choose to do with it, right? But you can find people that are using money in very positive ways and using it for good, right? And when you can start to reframe and start looking at that positive side, like that abundant side versus that scarcity side. Yeah.
So we've touched on the money conversation with clients, which is a big topic. But what about going back to what we talked about earlier about increasing your own hourly rate or your own value? Do you find that people in general, but we're talking about vets here, struggle with that, with believing that they are worth it, worth more? Like having a plan and saying, well, I'm going to increase my value. I'm going to get really good at this thing. Now, how am I going to monetize that? I'm the vet in the clinic and I am suddenly really good at doing ultrasounds that I wasn't 3 years ago and nobody else is. But then that's often where that stops. It stops at the, well, I like doing this. But I've seen it very infrequently where people will go, well, how do I turn this into more income? And whatever that means to me. So as you say, whether that's more time off or investing or whatever else.
Yeah. The short answer is yes. I struggled with this a lot, with your own self-worth. And that's a tough one. I think really a lot of it comes down to confidence, like confidence in yourself, belief in yourself. One of my earliest mentors would always say to me, the problem is confidence, not competence. When I was maybe struggling through something, and he could recognize, I was very competent. I was just maybe at times lacking confidence. So developing that confidence, for me, in its most simplest capacity, developing confidence is keeping promises to yourself. And you can do that on a daily basis and even on a micro basis it's just keeping your word. And it can be as simple as, I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk and then doing it. And that's a vote. Like, you've casted a vote of confidence in yourself. And all these things start to stack on each other, right? So you're not going to jump in at the deep end and be like, I took a TPLO course, so on my very first surgery, I'm 100% confident. No, it's going to be a process of stacking those wins on top of each other. But you have to stick with it. Like, as veterinarians, I've found we view failure so negatively, right? Like, we've just been trained, whether it's through the university and all the tests we have to take, where failure just hits us so hard, right? And we have to understand failure is the path forward. Like, before you get good at anything, you will fail at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think about that because, you listen to all of the professional or personal development books and podcasts and things like that. And it's a very common theme that you got to fail. You got to fail to get better. You got to fail. It's a little bit trickier in our profession when we talk about clinical work because you can't really fuck up too badly. There are repercussions for those failures. So how do you institute that mindset of I'm willing to extend myself, but with some guardrails in place where I'm not going to stuff up too badly and put my patients in any serious risk and get myself into any real sort of trouble?
Yeah, that is a tough one because in our profession, the stakes are high, right? Like, a pet could lose its life. That's for real. And so I think that's just the measured approach, why mentorship is so important. I'm thinking back, I remember when I was in my early, I think it was first year, doing C-sections on cattle. And I remember I'd have the cell phone off to the side with the phone number scribbled on a piece of paper because I'm scrubbed in. These are in the middle of the night, so there's you and a farmer. And I can remember a few times where I'd have my arms are inside the cow and I'd have to look to the farmer and be like, can you go to that cell phone and dial that number that's written down? And that was kind of my escape valve, where my mentor would be on the other end and willing to help out. So that's why mentorship's so important. But I mean, you can scale into that, right? It's like, take the course, then do it with someone before you're maybe the sole surgeon doing one of those things. But it is like, if you lose that sense of being willing to push into your uncomfort zone, unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of vets will pull back and then get very stagnant, right? And you get stagnant in your growth, you get stagnant in your joy in the profession, right? It takes a big toll on you.
Let's get back to the money mindset. Is that the same principle? I'm not sure how we even got onto the failure thing. So let's go back to young Mike, who is increasing his hourly value and maybe has a story around money. If there's somebody listening to this going, well, yeah, this resonates. Clearly, I have a story and I want to increase my personal value. How do I get better at it? Is it the same thing? Is it just surrounding yourself with people, having these sorts of conversations, or trying and failing? Or how did you get better at that, at valuing yourself more in terms of a monetary value?
Yeah, for me, I mean, a lot of it shifted too as other components of life start adding in. So it's very easy to give up more of your time when there's nothing else really pressing to take it, if that makes sense. So I can think back to when I was just, a single veterinarian, and, you'd go in and do all sorts of stuff on days off and whatnot. Now that I have 2 kids, I have a very compelling reason to really guard my time, because for me personally, spending time with them is the highest value task, right? And so everything is a trade-off. If I spend 1 hour less reading my kids a bedtime story and tucking them in at night because I'm off doing something else, it's like, that better be a really, really valuable thing that I'm doing, because it's taking away from an exceptionally valuable part of my life.
So it's drive and desire and motivation. It definitely comes into it. So if I have to have that difficult conversation about money with the boss or do something like that, that way has some friction, right? But if the thing that's pushing me in the direction isn't strong enough, I'm not going to overcome that friction. I'm going to go, well, it's easier in this lane because I don't really have that massive need to do that. So you have to find yourself something that drives you to do it. I resonate with that for sure. Definitely it was the same situation for me where suddenly I started going, I've got kids. Now my time is really valuable. It's not about lying on the couch or watching a movie or something like that. It's doing something that I genuinely value with my time. Something has to change. Take those steps.
I've heard people describe it as, you have to pick your hard. So it could be considered hard to have that uncomfortable conversation, with your boss or whoever that's with. But it will also be hard to look back on your life and regret, missing key moments. So it's like, you get to pick which one of those hard situations do you want to encounter. All of that is going to influence your actions, which influence your results. So I'm a big fan of the quote by Earl Nightingale, where he says, you become what you think about most of the time. So I would just encourage your listeners to give some thought to, when they are thinking about money, what are they thinking about most of the time? And is that a negative scarcity thought? And if it is, how can they convert that over to a more positive, abundant thought most of the time? And that will serve them well.
Okay, gold. So more of my internet stalking of Mike Bug. I'm interested. I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and on there, your description of what you are, you have it written as a real estate investor, veterinarian, and entrepreneur. And it's interesting that a real estate investor is before veterinarian in your list. Is that just random? Did it happen randomly, or did you think about that carefully? Did you sit there and edit it and go, like, why did you find yourself as a real estate investor primarily, and then veterinarian?
Yeah, this is an awesome question. It is intentional. I switched it around whenever I left clinical practice, just because for me, it didn't feel authentic to, like, if I wasn't practicing as veterinarian, to lead with that. I mean, I still do consider myself a veterinarian. Like, I've graduated, I'm licensed, all of that. I'm just not clinically practicing. But it does open up a larger conversation around identity, right? And for a long time, I really like, I am a veterinarian, I really clung to that. And that was like how I introduced myself. That's how I viewed myself. And so sliding that down is part of me, like, teasing it away. Like, yes, I am a veterinarian, but I'm more than that. I'm a real estate investor. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a husband, all these different things. So that is part of how I'm starting to accept, like, there's much more to my identity than just that one job description.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is that I've gone through the same process at some time in the past. That it wasn't for a specific profile or a CV or something. It was more just an exercise for myself. So I try to write down, I am Hubert Hemstra, I am, and then fill in the blanks. And that exercise of trying to do that in order of importance is really quite useful. It's very interesting. So am I veterinarian first and foremost, or father, or surfer? And that actually helped me guide how I wanted to spend my time. I went, okay, so well, if I say parent first, then I've got to try and reflect that in my calendar. I've got to work towards saying, well, don't just say it, show me. I heard this before somewhere. Somebody said, if you want to talk to me about what you value, don't tell me, show me your calendar. And as I say this, I'm mindful how terrible I am at the moment at parenting and how much time I'm spending on podcasting. So it's a really useful exercise. Think about what are those things beyond the things I do for money, put them in there, and then live your life according to that.
I love that. Yeah, I've heard that the calendar thing is just so valuable, right? Because you can, I don't want to say lie, because we're not intentionally lying to ourselves, but you can trick yourself from time to time.
Yeah.
And life will ebb and flow. So, I mean, we have to look at this broadly, like, one day doesn't define you, but, like it is, where are you spending most of your time? Well, that's probably what you value the most. And it is.
Yeah. So how did the real estate thing happen for you? How did real estate investors slide up to the number one spot? And again, not ahead of parenting and all that sort of stuff, but professionally speaking, at least.
Yeah. Well, I guess it just sort of happened, like, one at a time. I was pretty fortunate. I was introduced to real estate investing by accident, but in an excellent way, from my parents. So when I went to vet school, they bought a house and they kind of said, you can live here. You have to fill all the other bedrooms, right? And if you can get a whole bunch of roommates, then you won't have to pay rent. So I kind of got to live for free for my entire vet school. It was their house.
Nice.
But at the end of vet school, when I think it was 6 years later when they sold it, they did financially really well on it. And so that was kind of my first, like, aha into real estate investing. It wasn't my investment, but I got to witness it, right? So then when Rosalie and I started purchasing investment properties for ourselves, off the start, I had no intention that, someday this might replace the veterinary income. It was just like, this is a retirement play. But after a couple of years and we started to see how powerful it was, I was like, wow, if we stick on this path, this is going to unlock a lot of time freedom for me. And so it just kind of was one of those things where the temperature on the water was continually turning up. And, if you don't look at it, it eventually boils. And once it started boiling, I was like, wow, we've really got something here.
So what does real estate investor look like for you today? Are you actively looking at properties and selling and managing, or what do you mean by I'm a real estate investor?
Yes. So again, keeping in mind that I am optimizing for freedom and time freedom. So that has now dictated a lot of how I'm showing up. Initially, I did everything, right? Just sort of the classic, I'll do it all. Now I spend most of my time looking for apartment buildings. So we started in the single family space. Now I buy entire apartment buildings, and I'm looking for buildings that I can go in and transform. So like completely renovate, maybe like add units or add bedrooms or whatever that looks like, and dramatically change the value of them. And then we do hold them long-term as a rental, but I now outsource all of that to a property management company, right? So I pay for that service, but I'm not the one day-to-day managing operations.
And do you also, or did I misunderstand this? Do you offer a coaching or a teaching on investing for other people as well? Is that part of the things that you do?
I don't officially coach or mentor. Like, I don't charge anyone for it, I end up having a lot of conversations because it's just honestly one of the things I'm the most passionate about in the world, and especially talking with veterinarians, I just get so fired up when they want to take charge of their life and their financial future. So I informally consult with lots of people. On the investing side, I do work with others. I'm an active real estate investor, and there will be people that want to be completely passive, and they say, okay, you know what you're doing. I don't want to do any of it. Can we just team up together and you go do it all? And so I do some of those type of things too.
Okay. And is that how you spend the majority of your professional time now? Like, if you had to say, what are you now? Is that it? Is that what you do with your time? Or is it the podcasting? Or we'll get back to the book. Are you an author?
I would say yes. Like the real estate investor, if I had to say, okay, what is your professional career? At this point, that's what takes the majority of my time. The podcasting I view as kind of a passion project. So that's me and Jonathan, we kind of tackle that together. That definitely takes a few hours a week, but I love it. Like this, it's no different than this. I would have never got to meet you otherwise. You're just chatting with really interesting, cool people. The record button happens to be on. Like that's literally how I look at podcasting. We don't have any sponsorship. We self-fund it. Like it is fully a passion project. So that would be my other thing. Writing the book, also a passion project. That was something I just always wanted to do. And then other than that, it's being dad. 2 young kids it fills a lot of the spots.
Yeah, it could fill up all of your time, right? It can be a bit of a bottomless pit of time, and I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily. Before we move on to the book, and I'm dying to ask you about that, but just back to the investing again, for people listening to this who are into investing, because we've had a couple of finance episodes in the past. We had one a while ago with one of Australia's leading personal finance guys.
I listened to that episode while I was out for my run yesterday, I think it was.
Cool. With Noel. Yeah. And there's also a few other people who have talked about shares versus, and I know I'm getting into the nitty gritty here. So if somebody's listening to this and you're not into finance, then maybe the next couple of minutes is not for you. But looking at real estate versus shares, do you invest in shares as well? And why the leaning towards real estate? Because I've heard lots of smart people talk about real estate being a much harder work investment. It's very active, engaged things, and you're going to have problems with stuff like, leaking roofs and problems with tenants. And often people don't count the hidden costs and little bits of money that get drained on the side at real estate. And then Noel said, for example, comparing some of his real estate investments, the return on investments, like he talked about the one apartment that he had in the podcast that he sold for a good profit. And he went, yeah, that's great. But if I'd had that money in a simple index fund for the same period of time, it would have been worth like 5 times as much. Do you have a take at that at all? And then on the flip side, I've got a good friend who does both, but he loves his real estate. He said he's done really well from it. So yeah, what's your take on it?
Well, yeah, I do have a take on it. The short answer to your first question, do I invest in like shares and stocks, is yes. But that wasn't always the case. So when I was first go back, say 2012, like 10 or 11 years ago, I was exclusively investing in real estate. And the reason that I was exclusively investing in real estate was I felt that I had more control over it. Now, right, like if I wanted to dive into understanding, stocks and go on earning calls and understand, the financial statements of the different companies, okay, we could do that and I could try get a bit of an advantage there. But I found it a lot easier on the real estate side. And so the reason I'm saying that is real estate is an inefficient market, right? Whereas the stock market is not. If I wanted to buy, I'm not sure if it's your largest company, but BHP is a fairly significant company in Australia, right?
Yep.
If I wanted to go buy stock and shares in BHP, it's kind of whatever the market price is that day, that's what I'm going to buy them for. Whereas on the real estate side of things, there's no live pricing. You can find a house where the owner, hasn't painted it in 20 years and, it's kind of beat up and just cosmetically doesn't look as good. So it's undervalued to what its true value is. So I look at that, if BHP stock is trading at $63, I look at it on the real estate side as this is like someone took that share certificate, crumpled it up, threw it on the ground. It's all dirty. They stomped on it. And someone's looking at it and says, oh, this crumpled piece of paper is only worth $40. And I look at it and I say, well, wait a minute here. If I'll just pick it up and I'll smooth it out and we'll get all the dirt off of it there. And, sure, that means I have to do some work. It means I have to paint the house, but now it's back to $63. So that's how I look at real estate, is I'm always looking for where can I drive the value. But you are 100% right in that it is not passive. Like it is work. And I'm always really clear on that because I do not want to mislead people and have them think, oh, it's just this very easy thing that you do. And it's like, no, that is not the case. Not how I've done it. Right. And I'm also not one of those real estate investors that's against the stock market at all. Like I believe people should have both.
That's a cool insight. I like that. So there's a lot more emotion involved in real estate versus, as you say, the stock market is more rational in the long term. Not always day to day, but there is a degree of rationality and predictability in the stock market versus if you have the skills and the insight not to get on the wrong side of emotions with property, you can actually utilize that, right? Maybe that's why I'm no good at real estate, because I get overexcited and then I overpay and then I undersell it every single time.
Yeah. And it does happen. And it is an emotional thing, especially if you're talking about people's personal houses, right? There's a lot of attachment.
Yeah. All right. Let's dive into the book. Can you remind me, what's it called again?
You're going to get peed on.
I love that. And then it's got a cool subtitle as well. What's the full title of the book?
You're gonna get peed on.
How veterinarians can keep their dream job from becoming a nightmare while working less and earning more.
That's an important book to write. First of all, why write the book? Because it's not a small commitment, right?
It was not. No. I mean, writing a book is something I always wanted to do. I do really enjoy writing. At various times I'll kind of go through fits and starts, but I'll put out different blog posts. But why writing this book is I was going through my career. And so keeping in mind, I graduated in 2008. So I'm in veterinary school 2004 to 2008. And when I graduated and came out of vet school, I personally felt, very underprepared for all of the other things, right? I'm not talking medicine and surgery. I'm talking about dealing with clients, talking to clients. I just felt like I was we didn't get taught any of this and we're learning it on the fly. And there's all this stuff that I didn't know about. Right. And I go on and I have 10 years of clinical experience under my belt. And I just got to witness how my perspective changed along the way, year after year after year. And then I started going, you'd have a coffee meeting with different veterinarians and you get into a real conversation about how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I was like, wow, everyone is feeling this way, right? Currently in 2023, it's much more talked about now. A lot of the issues, podcasting is more popular, YouTube channels. There's more of a conversation happening, which is excellent. But that's why I wrote the book. I remember finishing one of my workouts. I was doing a rower workout and I kind of fell off the rower and I was like, I have to share this story with everyone. There's a saying I've heard where you are most equipped to serve those that you've struggled with. Your struggles can help to serve others. And so that's why I wanted to write this, is tell my story, tell the things I learned. I'm leaning on the podcast. I think we're coming up on episode 128 over on our podcast. I've had a lot of conversations with veterinarians all over the world. So I got to pull a lot of that together and hopefully, other veterinary students out there or early career vets or even late career vets can learn from that, learn from the wisdom of others.
It's interesting. That's exactly why the Vet Vault started. It's almost a carbon copy. And it's not that I got to the 10-year mark and went, oh, I've got it all figured out now. I should tell the world about it. it was just that shifted perspective going that for the first 10 years of my career, this was really hard. I found it really challenging and I didn't particularly like it. And then around the 10 to 15 years out, I went, hey, this is getting easier. I'm starting to hit my stride. I don't hate it. And actually, some days it's really fun now. And I started thinking about, well, why is it easier? What happened? Is it just clinical experience and confidence and learning the skills? But then going back and going, well, I wish I had some of these skills even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Let's start digging and see if we can learn more. And then funny enough, the podcast happened because I wanted to write a book. I wanted to speak to veterinarians who have figured some things out because I thought, well, if I've learned some things, what more can I learn? Surely I can learn so much more from other vets to make this even better. So let's talk to other vets and write a book about it. And then the book became a podcast. My research project for a book just became the podcast that I never did the book. Maybe one day.
Yeah, it's fun. You learn a lot about yourself. I will tell you that much. When you are, putting words on paper and realizing you're going to release them onto the world like permanently forever, there's a lot of introspection.
So what did you learn about yourself?
Well, I learned that I still have a bit of the perfectionist in me because it took me forever to write this book. I started this when COVID hit in 2020, and I would pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down. I also learned that I have too many irons in the fire, right? I need to focus a little more. Like this book could have been done much more efficiently, right? But just my nature, I say yes to too much stuff. So those were some of the big ones where I was like, if I ever write another book, I will approach it very differently, right? And I'll clear my schedule, clear my plate, focus, get it done.
That's good advice. I'll take it. It sounds exactly like, and again, I really enjoy writing, but because of all the irons in the fire, because I used to blog a little bit and I had this idea of the book, but too many things going on and I still don't know how to fix that problem. You get too excited about all these different little things, all these different opportunities that you can take. So I'll take your advice. If I ever do decide to write that book, I'll clear the decks.
Yeah, it'll help out.
Why the two parts to the title? Why you're going to get peed on? Sort of a silly start and then the serious message in the book. What is that you're going to get peed on represent for you?
Well, I mean, it's factually pretty true, figuratively and literally. If you're
going to get way more than peed on. It's going to be all sorts of bodily fluids.
For me, what that title represents was kind of, I guess we'll say, for the straw that broke the camel's back in a sense. And I love cats. I love working with cats, and I don't even mind fractious cats. Like I kind of was like, kind of understand like, okay, they're a little bit frustrated right now. But yeah, there was one cat one day in practice. It was a tomcat doing the classic, playing pretty coy, but then springs into action. And I remember he's scratching and biting, and he kind of was flying through the air, and our one tech kind of caught him midair, and like his momentum swung him around. And I was standing there with the syringe in my hand, and I literally just get covered in tomcat pee, and even in my mouth. That was like, I've been peed on a lot, but I think that was the first one that like literally went in my mouth. And I was like, wow. It's funny, apparently, because I worked with a company to help me like get this book along. Apparently, when you write a book, the title is the last component, right? Like you write the book, and then out of that book, a title appears. I was the exact opposite. When that happened, I was like, knew immediately. I was like, I'm going to write a book called You're Going to Get Peed On. Right. And then the book came after from that moment.
I'm still curious about why though, because again, as you say, factually accurate, you will get peed on. But what does it represent? Is it I'm guessing that it's there's going to be some stuff about this career that is going to be challenging and interesting. And then what? Like, why? Because that's almost I wouldn't say it's a negative title, but it has a like, this is going to be hard. But I feel like your book is very much of a positive book, in a more of a let's make it work.
Yeah, I think to that end, it's about, and again, I am a really positive person. Like I like to see what the challenge is, and then quickly get over to the other side of, okay, how do we navigate that challenge? And I know when I was coming through and decided to be a vet, I maybe wasn't aware of the challenging side of the coin, right? It's not that anyone was hiding it from me. I was just really caught up on the more romanticized side of the equation, right? Where everyone I talk to is like, I'm going to be a veterinarian, and they just, they just love it. They're just so happy for you. And it is an amazing profession. I just felt very underprepared that there is the other side of the coin where you are going to get peed on, right? And so that's kind of the two parts of that title.
Okay, cool. Now I get it. It's good. It's sort of a look. There are some realities about this. There are going to be some challenges, and you're going to get peed on is a good description of all the stuff that's going to happen. You're going to get shouted at. You're going to get all these things, but yet fulfilling, and you could live it in a way that it's not a nightmare and make it a positive experience. I like that a lot. And again, getting peed on, getting tomcat pee in your mouth, in retrospect, makes for good stories, right? That's what keeps life more interesting. And then the working less and earning more component of your book, does that explore the real estate investing? What do you talk about in the book in that case? Because that grabs my attention. If I'm a young vet and I'm deciding to read a book that's saying work less and earn more, I'd be like, yep, yes, I'm in.
So I do touch on investing a little bit. I don't go like super granular and detailed in the like how to investing, because I think what's much more important early on is just the context around, money conversations and investing. So my goal with the book, it's set up where roughly the first 2/3 talk about various challenges in your veterinary career, and the last third gets into that money piece. And I think like one of the greatest services I can do for the veterinary industry is trying to encourage more people to consciously have those conversations, like have the money conversation that you and I just had, have an investing conversation, reach out to certified financial planners and just take charge of it. Get intentional about that finance and money piece in your life. Right? Because as we've said, it's going to affect your life whether you pay attention to it or not. So the goal in my book is to just change the context, to go from, you told me a story earlier where you said, I don't remember who it was, but I don't care about money. To go from that sort of apathetic approach to, okay, money is just this neutral tool that I can use for my benefit if I want. That doesn't have to be a negative thing. I'm not causing harm to someone else because I'm having money, and I can use it to really enrich my life and those around me.
Yeah. And I think that's such a valuable message to get out there again and again. For me personally, and it might just be me, but part of that shift from I don't like vet that much to I actually quite enjoy the work came when I got into a position where I could disconnect how much I worked based on how much I owed the bank. I always say that the bank is probably the worst boss that you can ever work for. If the frequency of your shifts and how much you work and how burnt out you are is determined by how much you need to earn, that's not a recipe for a good vet career. If you can go, well, I work because I enjoy it, and the money is at least to some extent taken care of. My primary reason for going to work is not the money. Massive shift. Massive emotional shift. That whole story changes for me personally.
Yeah, and in lots of the conversations I have, it's exactly the same, where veterinarians truly want to help. They truly love what they're doing. They've just found themselves in a situation where they're doing too much of it, right? If they could just turn that dial down a little bit, they'd be in a much better spot. And one of those components is having their financial affairs in order.
Yeah, I always tell the story. I'm a very keen surfer. It's one of my first loves. And I don't feel like I could ever get enough of it. And yet I have gone on a 10-day surf trip, where by day 8, I was kind of sick of it. I don't really feel like surfing anymore. I'm sitting there on the beach looking at these perfect waves going, I'm exhausted, my body's tired, and I just don't want to do it today. And if I can feel that way about my passion, then how the hell is it not going to happen? How do you expect that not to happen for something as challenging as veterinary science?
Yeah, one last story because it's too fitting is, as I mentioned, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. So those are the nighttime stories that we're reading. And she has this one story called Yummy Yucky, right? And for most of the story, it's going along the lines of French fries are yummy, worms are yucky. But there's one page in there that says ice cream is yummy, too much ice cream is yucky. And I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. Like, this is exactly life, right? We can have a good thing, and then we just do too much of it to the point that it becomes yucky.
I don't know about that, but I kind of feel like ice cream has got to be the one exception to that rule.
I would think. I'm a big ice cream fan, so yeah. It's got to be a lot of ice cream to be yucky.
I've yet to reach the point where ice cream is yucky. But again, maybe I just haven't tested that theory. Mike, how are you for time? Because I have another question that's potentially fairly big. Yeah, you good? Okay, so let's jump in. So I looked at your book and at the homepage for your book, and in the, I think it's the blurb around the book, there's a line that I was curious about. Let me find it in my notes. Between the never-ending stream of appointments, constant decision-making, and empathy exhaustion, the reality of blah, 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 blah. And it goes on along those lines. But the word in there that I want to pick out is empathy exhaustion. That's an interesting phrase. Why empathy exhaustion and not compassion fatigue or burnout? Was that a thoughtful decision, or was it just something that the editors put in there?
It was certainly intentional. So for most of my veterinary career, empathy fatigue and compassion fatigue were used interchangeably, right? Like one in the same. And it wasn't until like in the process of writing this book, I started to do a little bit of research around that. And that's when I started to tease apart. It was actually one of the professors at our local university. And she had gone on the deep dive of teasing apart empathy versus compassion, right? And she has some really interesting research around how it's actually empathy that will fatigue, right? Whereas compassion does not. Because when you look at, MRIs of the brains in various circumstances, compassion can actually be like rejuvenating to you, right? It's not triggering the distress pathways in the brain, such as empathy is. So compassion, when we look at it, is feeling for someone, right? Like if you were in pain currently, I would say, I see that you're in pain and I feel for you and I wish you not to have that. Mm-hmm. Whereas empathy, if I saw that you were in pain, I'd be feeling with you and I would potentially be starting to take that pain on. And now I'm feeling pain also. And that's the part that over a career, can be depleting and can lead to burnout.
That's so interesting because I'm currently down a big rabbit hole. I'm working on a talk that I'm delivering later in the year that I've got this idea about empathy versus compassion based on a book that I read by Professor Paul Bloom from Yale, where he argues that empathy is not necessarily what we want, because empathy in his definition is I recognize your suffering and I feel your suffering, which is a negative emotion, versus what he calls compassion. And we can talk about the semantics, but compassion being I recognize your suffering, maybe I feel it, but I want to do something about it, and I do something about it, which becomes a positive emotion, which then made me wonder, we talk about compassion fatigue. Is it actually compassion fatigue? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? And I've lined up a recording session with a psychologist who did a lot of research in this, so watch this space. But yeah, your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, this is just my thoughts on it is, I do think there's only so much, like if the day is jam packed, even feeling for someone and feeling compassion, sometimes you just need a break. But what I found it is like that empathy, but it was really when it slipped into the empathetic distress, like that's what really added the mileage on, like you said, when you're locked into feeling with someone and paralyzed by that pain, right? That was the big stuff for me that would leave it where it's like, oh man, that was only one case, but it felt like 20. I can send some research articles along because it was like fascinating. And from that, that sent me personally on a bit of an offshoot towards mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was just a form of meditation. But I found that to be like tremendously helpful for me personally. And when you look at the research behind it, tremendous value for everyone, but especially for veterinarians and healthcare providers.
Yeah, so the whole point of the talk I want to do is exactly that, and I'm sure you came across the same sort of data, is that specific kinds of meditation can literally change how your brain responds, how those pathways light up. So you mentioned that the empathy response is in a certain part of your brain, and that compassion response, that I want to act response, is in a completely different part of the brain. And the people that default to the empathy response, they can, by those types of meditation, so for example, loving kindness meditation or metta meditation, can actually shift, and this is shown on functional MRI. It's not just people think that this happens, they've proven it. They can shift how they respond neurologically. Isn't that fascinating stuff? That neuroplasticity of going, well, this is my default reaction, this is who I am, I can't help it. Not true. You can actually change something about it.
Yeah, it's like training a muscle in the gym. Like in that same research, the MRI will show like physical parts of the brain expanding, other parts decreasing in size. And so the coolest part is like, you don't have to be in a meditative state in that moment, right? You get to carry the benefits with you, right, into the veterinary clinic, right? So you can have this meditation practice, be building on it, but then when you're just spontaneously thrust into these highly emotional situations, that's your new default, right? And you just keep building on it. So it's fascinating stuff.
So do you talk about it in the book, how to deal with compassion, empathy, those sort of things? Is that part of the stuff that you cover?
Yeah, I bring in some of that research, right? And obviously it's all cited. Really it comes down to a few sort of simple things, listening and changing your perspective. So just like we talked about earlier on the money side of things, in every aspect of life, people have this background story that we know nothing about, right? And so you can't expect to be in your exam room with your client and fully understand them without fully listening to them, right? And changing their perspective. And then I do go into the mindfulness-based stress reduction. That is like one of those things where I feel like I could stand on my desk and jump up and down. And if I could just snap my fingers and have like every veterinarian and every veterinary student in the world, like do one tactical thing, it would probably be that, right? Some form, and it's going to look different for everyone, but that specifically the mindfulness-based stress reduction practices, and in a nutshell, this is probably not the official definition, but it's just being completely present and observing your surroundings in a non-judgmental way, right? Because you know how quickly people snap to judgment. I use the example, you walk into the treatment room and one of the IV pumps is beeping. And we immediately make a judgment. Okay, who didn't plug it in? Okay, who didn't put a full bag on, or whatever the judgment might be. Mindfulness-based stress reduction would just teach you to simply observe. The IV pump is beeping. Okay, there's no judgments around that, right? We haven't placed blame on anywhere. We haven't told ourselves any made-up story. It's just beeping. Now we'll go deal with that.
Mike, unless we want this to be our first ever 3-hour episode, which maybe we should just go for it, right? We should probably start wrapping up. So let's start with my wrap-up questions. I'm assuming that you're a podcast listener. I don't think I've ever met anybody who makes a podcast who doesn't listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I am for sure. I don't listen to our own anymore. I used to listen to all of them, and then I was like, oh man, it's just something about hearing your own voice, but pretty active. But I do go in waves. So what I do is every quarter of the year, I'll pick a topic and I will deep dive that. And so if there's a podcast that aligns or a book that aligns, or maybe it's a YouTube channel that aligns. So currently, as we wrapped up Q1 of 2023, I was more over in the YouTube space and I was deep diving Dr. Benjamin Hardy, who's an organizational psychologist. So I know you'd asked for a recommendation, and that was what I had spent, the first part of 2023 consuming.
I like that approach, actually, Because otherwise your consumption of stuff can be a little bit scattered and all over the place. And I personally find it sometimes that there's so many thoughts and so many things coming from so many angles, it can almost become a little bit overwhelming. So I really like that sort of a thematic approach that you've got.
Yeah, I'm part of a mastermind. There's 6 of us. We meet every Monday. So we met earlier today on the recording. So for Q2 2023, we're going to deep dive longevity, right? So we've ordered Peter Attia's new book. He's a medical doctor on longevity, and so we'll consume podcast episodes and YouTube channels all around longevity for those 3 months.
Can I just highlight again how cool that is? The fact that you get to do this, the fact that you're part of this mastermind, which I could ask you about, it sounds really cool. But the fact that you learn all these other things and nerd out on longevity, if you're still in that clinic that you went to on day one and you were working 50 hours a week because, well, you had to, you wouldn't be doing these things because your head would be stuck in your workspace, and when you get home, you'd be exhausted and you would have no mental capacity to explore what else life has to offer.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty cool. And it is like embracing, like, there's a part of me that's a nerd, like I love learning and I love going deep on different topics. Like in 2020, one of my deep dives was breathing, right? So I read a lot of James Nestor, and that's when the mindfulness based stuff came in. And again, it was like the breathing deep dive was arguably, I would say, life-changing. There's just so much interesting information out there.
So specific breathing exercises, like this conversation, I think, can go on for at least an extra hour just talking about this.
Yeah. In a super nutshell, it's just approaching how most people breathe, and most people breathe incorrectly, right? Like if we were doing it completely properly, you're going to be driven much more by your diaphragm, right? That big sort of up and down breath. But over time, a lot of people get conditioned where we're actually breathing more just through like our ribs and our chest muscles, right? So we're breathing out, and then you actually are only using a portion of your lung capacity there, right? I work with a personal trainer, and he has a saying, if you can't breathe there, you can't be there. And it's like, it just applies to everything. Like you can apply that to a client communication. You can apply it to working out in the gym. You can apply it to money conversations. And like how you can control your breath, I find massively dictates your ability to navigate various situations, right? Because you think about that, think about walking into a client exam room and they're angry for whatever reason, and they hit you with some sort of, elevated tone of voice or something. You're immediately shortening your breath. You're breathing through the top portion of your chest. You're having a bit of trouble talking, a bit of a lump in the throat. If you can control your breathing and just take that all down, like use your diaphragm, breathe very deeply, it just calms everything, right? And it's, again, the situation didn't change. All you changed was your relationship to the situation.
Okay, the pass along question. So how this one works is we get the previous guest to give me a question that I have to ask the next guest. You're going to have to answer that, and then you need to give me a question that you want me to ask the next guest. So the question for you is that if you had to restart your career as a fresh grad, but you had all of the skills and the knowledge that you have now, how would your career look different?
And but podcaster to podcaster, I love that you do this. I love that a previous guest gets to lay the question. So that's pretty cool. For me, the one that I came up with is I would honor my standards. And so I know there's a lot of talk, people will talk about what are your core values and such. I like to view it a lot more as standards. And I think about, in my clinical journey, it would be the second veterinary clinic that I was at. So not the first one, but the second. And if I was to change something, if I had the skills and the knowledge, I would have left that environment a lot sooner, because it certainly wasn't to what my standard was. Now, the catch is, back then at that age, I didn't really know what my standards were, right? And I mean, and that's natural. You're kind of feeling things out and feeling your way along. But I would have honored my standards a lot more. And so this was a situation of, we had a really great veterinary team, but I would say we had a really poor ownership group that did not treat us very well. And I accepted that far longer than I should have in hindsight.
Do you know why? Why didn't you leave?
I would say one was the veterinary group was truly excellent. We had this like peer-to-peer mentorship going on. One of them was a classmate of mine. The other one was like 1 or 2 years older than us. So there was a group of 3 of us, like all like cohesively learning together. And that they were excellent. As for why I didn't leave, I would say confidence would be one, like sort of lack of self-worth. When I think back to some of how some of the like salary negotiations went, like it's comical how like undervalued I was and that I accepted it. Right. Like when I look back at that, I would love to go back in time and slap me across the face. But I mean, that's part of the learning curve. So that's what I would take though, if I was starting over.
Yeah. The reason I dig into this is I experience the same and I see it a lot is that we put up with shit that we shouldn't, right? And we make excuses and we have reasons. But I feel like it's usually just fear-based, right? Fear of, well, what if I don't get another job? Maybe this isn't that bad because maybe the next job will be just as bad and at least better the devil, And then we get stuck in it. Or you go, yeah, I'm going to leave. But again, it's a hard decision to make. It's a hard thing to act on. And then suddenly you open your eyes and 5 years have gone and you go, how's that happen? And you have to sometimes get to the point where something dramatic happens, where you have to snap instead of just going, well, this isn't working for me. I don't want to waste my time in this situation, whether it's a job or something else even. I'm going to move on. Just be a little bit courageous with it.
Yeah. Me and that same mastermind group, we were recently chatting about the paradox of when things are like okay or not quite awesome, but they're not really bad. Right. And that doesn't create a high sense of urgency to change things. So in a weird paradoxical way, it would be way better if things were just way worse. Yep. Because it would make you take action.
Exactly. And I often wonder about that. How do you simulate those conditions that often lead to massive change? Because almost every book or podcast you listen to or read, there's a long drawn out story. And then there's this crisis point of some sort. And then there's a big change and everything eventually is better in hindsight. And I often go, well, can we maybe skip that crisis point? How can we skip it and just get to the better? But it is, again, about having that motivator to change, that push.
And so I know I keep going long on. Back to when you said that, what am I listening to? What am I deep diving? So with that Dr. Benjamin Hardy, one of the theories that he has is, how do you make that transformation? Is you make your future bigger. And so we just finished reading his book, 10x is easier than 2x. And the basic premise in there is, if I wanted to double whatever it is that I'm trying to double, the logical thing would be I'm just going to work harder. I'll put more time in. If I put in double the effort, I'll get double the result. That's pretty logical. Mm-hmm. And his theory is you need to throw all of that out the window and you have to ask yourself, how would you 10x wherever you are? Because there's very few paths that'll lead you to 10x. You're actually going to have to throw out most of the options. And so the key to doing 10x is not doing more. It's actually doing less. And it's figuring out, what are those critical few things to focus on and then going all in on that.
Excellent answer. So what is your question for our next guest?
Okay, my question, I'm leaning on the question I was asked, and I'm maybe expanding on it. For your next guest, I would sort of paint the frame of, okay, we look into the future and at their 85-year-old self. And my question for them is, what advice would their 85-year-old self give to them today?
Ooh, that's a good one. I immediately want to know what your answer is, but I can't. I will have to leave it lie there, and we'll pass it on to the next guest. So the final question, Mike, is you have an opportunity to speak to all of the veterinary new grads of the world. Maybe it's through some other random podcast called the Vet Project. You have a couple of minutes to give them just one little bit of advice. What is Dr. Mike's one bit of advice?
I would just say to them, they have the opportunity in front of them to create whatever life they want. And they don't need anyone else's permission to do that, right? They don't have to follow anyone else's shoulds, but they do need to get intentional about that. So they need to figure out, what is it that I truly, truly want? and how can I put that in action, get intentional, and start delivering on that day to day. That would be the biggest thing. I just see too many people, as you said earlier, jump in the river and just sort of float along wherever it takes him. And it's like, I'm kind of pounding on our microphones being like, grab a boat, grab a paddle. It'll take you wherever you want.
Mike, that was as good and better than I'd imagined. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you. And thank you so much for the things that you're doing, for doing your podcast, for your labor of love, and for writing the book. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there who take a lot from it. And I really, really appreciate your time.
Likewise, it was great to meet you. Thank you so much for having me. I love having these conversations when we get a little bit off script and get into some real good stuff.